For Alara Connolly, the world speaks in a language of scent and touch. As the owner of The Verdant Quill, a flower shop that is more sanctuary than business, she translates the silent poetry of the earth into bouquets that capture the full spectrum of human emotion. Her life is a well-tended garden, rooted in the steady, comforting presence of her husband, Liam, a man like a great oak, and brightened by their 6-year-old daughter, Maya, a vibrant wildflower who believes dandelions are fallen suns. Alara's hands, stained with soil and chlorophyll, are the instruments of her happiness, coaxing life from seeds and holding the two people who are her entire world. The first sign that a killing frost is coming is not a sudden chill, but a quiet, insidious weariness that seeps into her bones. At first, she dismisses it as the cost of a life passionately lived. But the exhaustion clings to her like a stubborn mist, and soon it is joined by a dull, persistent ache beneath her ribs. Liam, her ever-practical oak, assures her it's a pulled muscle from her work. But when a wave of dizziness nearly fells her in her own garden, and her daughter looks at her with wide, worried eyes and says, "Mommy, you look like a ghost," the quiet worry blooms into a cold, sharp-petaled flower of fear. The diagnosis, delivered in the sterile, scentless void of a doctor's office, is a brutal storm that flattens her meticulously cultivated world. The words are clinical and cold, stones dropped into the placid pool of her life. Stage 4 pancreatic adenocarcinoma. Metastasized. Inoperable. The prognosis is a death sentence delivered on a Tuesday afternoon. 6 to 9 months. 2 seasons. The time it takes for her spring bulbs to bloom and fade. The future, once a sprawling, sun-drenched landscape of possibility, collapses into a single, withered leaf, waiting for the wind. In the suffocating silence that follows, Liam's grief metastasizes into a frantic need for control. While Alara feels herself becoming a ghost in her own home, haunted by a life she is already mourning, Liam becomes a general in a war against her own body. His love, fierce and terrified, manifests as a tyranny of care. He draws up battle plans on legal pads, specialists, clinical trials, and a draconian new diet. Their pantry is purged of every small comfort: sugar, coffee, a jar of wildflower honey from a happy memory. And their mornings begin not with the aroma of coffee, but with the shriek of a juicer blending kale and ginger into a sludgy green protocol that tastes of righteous suffering. Liam is trying to save a body, but Alara feels her soul beginning to starve. She is being erased, her identity as a creator of beauty replaced by that of a patient, a set of symptoms to be managed, a life measured out in 15 unsalted almonds. Pushed to a breaking point, she finds she must wage a second, quieter war, not against the cancer, but for herself. She must fight for her right to her own life, even as she is losing it. Fleeing the sterile prison of her home for the beautiful, pollen-filled chaos of her studio, Alara begins a quiet rebellion. It is a rebellion fought with the velvet of a rose petal, the scent of fresh-cut stems, and the defiant act of creating something beautiful in the face of oblivion. What follows is a negotiation between two people bound by love and terror, a search for a new map to navigate the landscape of their remaining time. It is a story not about the clinical facts of dying, but about the messy, beautiful, and defiant art of living. Chapter 1. The Scent of Rain and Roses. The world, for Alara, had always been a language spoken in scents and textures. She understood the crisp, green perfume of a snapped stem, the velvety promise of a rose petal against her fingertip, and the deep, loamy fragrance of damp earth after a summer shower. Her flower shop, The Verdant Quill, was less a business and more a sanctuary, a place where she translated the silent poetry of the earth into bouquets that spoke of joy, sorrow, and everything in between. Her life was a well-tended garden. There was Liam, her husband, a steady and comforting presence like a great oak, his laughter the sound of leaves rustling in a gentle breeze. And there was Maya, their 6-year-old daughter, a vibrant wildflower, all bright colors and boundless energy, who believed that dandelions were suns that had fallen to earth. Alara's hands, often stained with soil and chlorophyll, were the instruments of her happiness, coaxing life from seeds, arranging beauty for others, and holding the two people who were her entire world. The first whisper of the coming storm was not a clap of thunder, but a quiet, insidious weariness. It was a fatigue that seeped into her bones, a leaden anchor she dragged through her days. At first, she dismissed it. Long hours at the shop, lifting heavy ceramic pots, the mental toll of running a small business, it was only natural. She would drink an extra cup of tea, go to bed an hour earlier. But the exhaustion clung to her like morning mist, refusing to burn away in the noonday sun of her busy life. Then came the ache, a dull, persistent throb beneath her right ribs. It was a guest that overstayed its welcome, a low note of music that was perpetually off-key. "You've just pulled a muscle," Liam would say, his hands gently massaging her back. "You work too hard, my love." She agreed, wanting it to be that simple. She was a gardener. Aches and pains were part of the trade. But the muscle never healed. The weariness deepened, casting a gray pallor over the vibrant colors of her world. The scent of hyacinths seemed less sweet. The task of wiring a bridal bouquet felt monumental. One afternoon, while helping Maya build a fairy house at the base of their garden's maple tree, a wave of dizziness washed over her so intensely she had to grip the rough bark to keep from falling. Maya looked up, her brow furrowed with a child's unfiltered concern. "Mommy, are you okay? You look like a ghost." That was the moment the quiet worry bloomed into a cold, sharp-petaled flower of fear. The doctor's office was the antithesis of her shop. The air was sterile, stripped of any scent save for antiseptic. The walls were a placid, unfeeling beige. There were no living things here, only plastic plants gathering dust in the corners. Dr. Aris was a kind man with tired eyes, who spoke in a calm, measured tone that Alara found both reassuring and terrifying. He listened to her symptoms, his pen scratching notes on a pad. What followed was a blur of referrals, appointments, and tests. Alara felt as if she were a specimen under glass. She lay in the hollow, echoing tube of an MRI machine, the rhythmic booming a counterpoint to the frantic drumming of her own heart. A technician, a young woman with a gentle touch, drew vial after vial of her blood, the dark crimson liquid-looking alien, as it filled the sterile tubes. They performed a biopsy, a procedure that felt like a violation, a cold, metallic intrusion into the sanctity of her own body. Through it all, Liam was her oak. He held her hand in waiting rooms, his thumb tracing soothing circles on her skin. He made terrible jokes that almost made her laugh. He managed Maya, the house, and the shop, shielding her from the daily demands of a life that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. Then came the day of the verdict. They sat opposite Dr. Aris in his small, sunless office. A single, framed print of a sailboat on a calm sea hung on the wall behind him. A cheap, mass-produced image of tranquility that felt like a cruel mockery. Dr. Aris didn't waste time with platitudes. He folded his hands on his desk, his gaze direct and filled with a compassion that made Alara's stomach clench. "Alara, Liam," he began, and the sound of her own name felt like a death knell. "The results of the biopsy are back. I'm very sorry to tell you that we found malignant cells." The words hung in the sterile air, devoid of meaning at first. Malignant cells. They were just words. Scientific jargon. They couldn't possibly have anything to do with her, with the woman who knew how to splint a broken dahlia stem and could identify a rose by its scent alone. She watched Liam's hand, which was holding hers, tighten. His knuckles turned white. "It's a form of cancer," Dr. Aris continued, his voice gentle but firm. pulling her back from the precipice of denial. Specifically, it's stage 4 pancreatic adenocarcinoma. It has, I'm afraid, metastasized to the liver. Stage 4. Pancreatic. Metastasized. The words were stones, each one heavier than the last, dropped into the placid pool of her life, and the ripples spread outwards, threatening to drown her. Her hearing seemed to warp, the doctor's voice fading in and out, as if he were speaking from the end of a long tunnel. Her eyes fixed on a small water stain on a ceiling tile. It looked like a ghost, a pale, faded map of a forgotten country. What does that mean? Liam's voice was hoarse, a sound she had never heard from him before. What do we do? Dr. Aris took a slow breath. At this stage, the cancer is inoperable. Our focus will be on palliative care. Chemotherapy can help to slow the progression and manage the symptoms. It can improve your quality of life. He paused, and in that pause, Alara felt the last of her sun-drenched world crumble into dust. With treatment, the median survival time is typically 6 to 9 months. 6 to 9 months. 2 seasons. The time it took for her spring bulbs to bloom and fade. The time it took for the summer roses to offer their fragrance and for their petals to fall. It wasn't a lifetime. It wasn't even a year. It was a death sentence, delivered in a quiet, air-conditioned room on a Tuesday afternoon. The drive home was a cocoon of suffocating silence. The world outside the car windows continued its oblivious dance. People walking dogs, children riding bicycles, the sun casting long shadows as the day began to wane. It was all so painfully, aggressively normal. Inside the car, time had stopped. Alara stared unseeing at the passing houses, each one a little universe of a life she would never have. A life of growing old with Liam, of watching Maya graduate, get married, have children of her own. When they pulled into their driveway, the sight of their small, welcoming home, with Maya's finger paintings taped to the front window, broke her. Liam turned off the engine, and in the sudden quiet, a sob tore itself from her throat, a raw, ragged sound of pure animal grief. Liam unbuckled his seatbelt and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. She buried her face in his shoulder, her body shaking with the force of her despair. The solidness of him, the familiar scent of his shirt, the warmth of his embrace. It was all still there, but a chasm had opened between them, an uncrossable canyon of sickness and time. It can't be, she whispered, the words muffled against his chest. It can't be true, Liam. He didn't answer. He just held her tighter, his own silent tears wetting her hair. In that moment, there was no hope. There was no medicine. There was only the cold, hard, clinical truth. The doctors, the men and women of science and fact, had given their prognosis. They had drawn a line at the end of her story. The garden of her life, once so full of color and promise, was now shrouded in a desolate, killing frost. The future, which had once been a sprawling, sun-drenched landscape of possibility, had collapsed into a single, withered leaf, waiting for the first harsh wind to carry it away. Chapter 2. The Language of Silence. Time did not restart when Liam killed the engine. It remained fractured, a shattered piece of glass reflecting a distorted world. For how long they sat in the driveway, suspended in the amber of the late afternoon sun, Alara couldn't say. The air in the car had become a solid thing, a heavy, unbreathable medium pressing in on them. Every tick of the cooling engine was an unbearable sound in the profound quiet. Finally, it was Liam who moved. He unbuckled his seatbelt, the click echoing like a gunshot. He didn't look at her, but stared at their front door as if it were the entrance to a foreign country. "We have to go in," he said, his voice a raw whisper. "Maya will be wondering where we are." Maya. The name was a physical blow, a fresh wave of grief so powerful it stole Alara's breath. How could they face her? How could they walk into that house? A house built on love and laughter and the smell of baking cookies, and carry this monstrous, silent thing with them. They were contaminated. They were actors stepping onto a brightly lit stage, having forgotten all their lines. Alara nodded, a numb, mechanical gesture. She watched her own hand reach for the door handle. It felt disconnected, an appendage belonging to someone else. Her body was a stranger's house, a place she was now condemned to haunt. The moment the front door opened, Maya was there, a whirlwind of pink overalls and untamed curls. "You're home. Grandma let me have 2 cookies. She said not to tell you." Her smile was a sunbeam, pure and unfiltered, and it seared Alara's heart. "Did you bring me a flower, Mommy?" Maya asked, her usual greeting. For the first time in her daughter's life, Alara had come home from the world of flowers empty-handed. The thought was absurdly painful. She knelt, her knees protesting, and tried to summon a smile. The muscles in her face felt stiff, uncooperative. "Not today, my little blossom." Mommy was very busy. Maya's brow puckered. She reached out a small, slightly sticky hand and touched Alara's cheek. "You're cold," she said, her voice dropping with childish solemnity. "Are you sad?" Liam stepped in, his voice a little too bright, a little too loud. "Mommy's just tired, sweet pea. Why don't you show me the amazing drawing you did for me today?" "Yes," wept Maya up into his arms, a practiced, fluid motion that looked impossibly difficult. He was holding their world together with sheer force of will. Alara watched them go towards the kitchen, Maya's high-pitched chatter about a purple dragon filling the space her own words could not. She stood alone in the hallway, the familiar scent of their home, cinnamon from the cookies, the faint, clean smell of laundry soap, the waxy aroma of Maya's crayons, assaulting her. These were the scents of her life, the notes that composed her symphony of happiness. Now, they were like the perfume of a ghost, reminders of a life that had been pronounced dead only hours ago. She looked at her hands, the hands that could coax a seed to sprout, that could arrange a perfect cascade of freesia and lisianthus. They looked alien, instruments of a craft she no longer had the right to practice. Who was she, if not a gardener of life? The evening unfolded in a strange, surreal pantomime of normalcy. Liam made spaghetti, his movements efficient but jerky. The scent of garlic and oregano, usually a comfort, was a violent intrusion that made Alara's stomach roil. She moved plates and forks from the cupboard to the table, her limbs heavy as lead. She felt like a marionette whose strings were tangled, each movement a clumsy, painful effort. At the dinner table, Maya chattered on, oblivious. She recounted a playground squabble, described in detail the fuzzy caterpillar she had found, and demanded to know if butterflies remembered being caterpillars. Alara and Liam exchanged empty phrases, their real conversation happening in the spaces between words, in the careful avoidance of each other's eyes. Each word was a careful stone placed across a chasm. Liam's smiles were tight, his laughter hollow. Alara knew he was looking at her, at the woman who was a walking eulogy, and seeing the terrifying emptiness of the future. Later, during bath time, Alara sat on the tiled floor while Liam washed Maya's hair. She watched the water sluice through the fine, blonde strands, the same color as her own. She catalogued the curve of her daughter's spine, the shape of her small, perfect ears, the constellation of freckles across her nose. She was trying to memorize her, to burn every detail into her mind, a frantic stockpiling of memories against a coming famine. The steam from the bath fogged the mirror, and for a moment, Alara's reflection was erased. It felt right. The hardest part was the bedtime story. It was her ritual, her sacred time with Maya. Tucked into the small bed, surrounded by a menagerie of stuffed animals, Maya's warm, sleepy body curled against hers, Alara opened a book. The words on the page were a meaningless jumble of black marks. She couldn't read them. Her mind was a static-filled radio, unable to hold on to a clear station. "Tell me one from your head, Mommy," Maya murmured, her eyes already drooping. "A flower story." Alara's throat tightened. She took a shaky breath, the scent of her daughter's shampoo, strawberries and soap, filling her lungs. Once, she began, her voice a strained whisper, there was a very special garden, and in this garden grew the most beautiful rose. It had petals the color of the sunset, and it was the sunniest, happiest rose in the whole world. She felt Maya relax against her. But one day, a cold wind came to the garden. It wasn't the normal winter wind. It was a secret, quiet wind that no one else could feel. And it blew, only on the little rose. It made her petals feel tired, and her leaves started to ache. Her voice broke. She paused, fighting for control. What happened? Maya whispered, her voice thick with sleep. Did the gardener fix her? Alara stroked her daughter's hair, her own tears now falling silently onto the pillow. The gardener tried very, very hard, my love. He gave her water and sunshine and told her how much he loved her. But the cold was very deep inside. It was a sleepy cold. It made the rose want to rest for a very, very long time. Maya was silent for a moment. Then, she shifted, wrapping her small arms around Alara's neck. It's okay, Mommy, she mumbled into her shoulder. She can sleep. I'll watch her. The simple, profound acceptance in her daughter's words shattered the last of Alara's composure. She held Maya tightly, burying her face in her small pajamas, and wept. She wept for the stories she would never tell, the scraped knees she would never kiss, the secrets she would never hear. Maya, half asleep, simply held on, offering a silent, anchoring comfort she couldn't possibly understand. After Maya was asleep, Alara found Liam in the darkened living room, standing by the large window that overlooked their backyard. The moon was bright, casting the garden in a stark palette of silver and black. He didn't turn as she approached. The oak tree, he said, his voice thick. I was just thinking about when we planted it. Maya was barely walking. You said it would grow with her, that it would be here to shade her own children one day. He turned to face her then, and in the pale moonlight, she saw the full extent of his devastation. The oak had been stripped of its leaves. His strength was a facade, and the cracks were deep and terrifying. What are we going to do, Alara? He asked, his voice breaking. 6 months? 9. How do you fit a lifetime into 9 months? How do I look at her every day and not? He couldn't finish. He covered his face with his hands, and a sob, a low, guttural sound of a man broken, escaped him. In that moment, a strange and terrible clarity pierced through Alara's fog of grief. She saw him not as her protector, her sturdy oak, but as a man drowning alongside her. And she realized, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she would have to be strong for him, too. She, the dying one, would have to comfort the living. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his trembling back. They stood there for a long time, 2 solitary figures holding each other up against the crushing weight of their new reality. Alara looked past him, out into the garden. Her sanctuary. In the moonlight, it was transformed. The familiar shapes of the delphiniums and foxgloves were skeletal silhouettes. The rose bushes, heavy with sleeping buds, looked like thorny specters. It was all still there, but its language had changed. The vibrant poetry she had known her whole life had been replaced by a silent, desolate prose. The killing frost had come, and she was no longer the gardener. She was the blighted bloom at the heart of it all, watching the color drain from her own world, petal by fallen petal. Chapter 3. The Treason of the Body. Dawn did not ask for permission. It crept into the bedroom, a pale, insistent light that painted stripes across the duvet, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the still air. For a single, blessed sec. And upon waking, Alara was simply Alara. Then memory, a brutal creditor, came to collect. The diagnosis slammed back into place, a block of ice forming in her chest. The world, which had been muted and gray the day before, was now offensively bright, a mockery of the darkness that had taken root inside her. Liam was still asleep, his back to her. His breathing was deep and even, but the faint tension in his shoulders told her it was a sleep born of exhaustion, not peace. She slipped out of bed, the cold of the wooden floor a shock to her system. In the bathroom, she avoided her own eyes in the mirror, focusing instead on the mundane ritual of brushing her teeth. But the stranger was still there, looking back at her from the periphery. Finally, she forced herself to look. Really look. Who was this woman? Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed, but otherwise, she was unchanged. There was no mark, no outward sign of the cellular mutiny staging a coup within her. She ran a hand over her abdomen, half expecting to feel the enemy, a hardened knot beneath the skin. There was nothing, just the familiar softness of her own body. This was the most profound betrayal, that her body, the vessel of her life, the home she had inhabited for 34 years, could lie to her so completely. It smiled at her from the mirror while it was quietly, diligently, killing her. The house was quiet save for the hum of the refrigerator. In the kitchen, the remnants of last night's pantomime sat on the counter. A single plate, a smear of spaghetti sauce. The sight of it made her feel nauseous. She started the coffee maker, the gurgling sound of familiar comfort in the echoing silence. The smell of brewing coffee, usually a herald of hope and new beginnings, now smelled like an ending. It was the scent of another day she had to get through. Morning. Liam's voice was husky. He stood in the doorway, dressed in a faded t-shirt and gray sweatpants, his hair a mess. He looked rumpled and lost, like a man who had woken up in the wrong house, in the wrong life. He didn't come to her for a hug, as he usually would. The space between them was a physical presence, a third person in their marriage. "Coffee's almost ready," she said, her voice flat. They moved around each other in a stilted ballet of avoidance, pouring coffee, adding milk, not touching. The silence stretched until it was thin and sharp. "I couldn't sleep," he finally admitted, staring into his mug as if it held the secrets to the universe. "I kept making lists in my head. Lists, things to do, places to see, second opinions. Dr. Albright in Boston, a specialist in this. Clinical trials. Diets. I was up half the night on the internet." He looked up, his eyes wide and frantic with a desperate, newly kindled hope. "There are things we can do, Alara. We can fight this." She felt a flicker of anger, hot and sharp. He was talking about fighting a war when she had already felt the finality of surrender. He was drawing battle plans on a map of a country that had already been occupied. But then she saw the raw fear beneath his bravado. He wasn't talking about fighting for her. He was talking about fighting for himself, for his own survival against the terror of being left alone. He needed a plan. He needed an action. "Okay," she said, the word tasting like ash. "Okay, Liam." A clatter of small feet on the stairs announced Maya's arrival. She burst into the kitchen, a sleepy, radiant sunbeam in dinosaur pajamas, clutching a stuffed giraffe. "Is it pancake morning?" she asked, her voice still thick with sleep. She climbed onto a stool and looked between them, her brow furrowing with that unnerving perception of hers. "Why are you two being so quiet?" "Just tired, sweet pea," Liam said, his voice instantly shifting into the bright, forced cheerfulness that was becoming his new language. "Big day yesterday. What do you say? Chocolate chip pancakes." "Yes." Maya cheered, her momentary suspicion forgotten. As Liam mixed the batter, his movements too quick, too loud, Alara felt a wave of dizziness. She gripped the counter, her knuckles white. The treason was not just a secret. It had physical symptoms, small reminders she had been ignoring for weeks. The persistent fatigue she'd blamed on busy season at the flower shop. The strange, dull ache in her back she'd attributed to lifting heavy pots. They weren't random complaints anymore. They were a language, the language of her body finally telling a truth she couldn't understand. "Are you going to the flower shop today, Mommy?" Maya asked, swinging her legs. Alara looked down at her hands. The hands that knew the precise pressure to tie a ribbon, the exact angle to cut a stem. The faint scars from rose thorns, the permanent stain of earth under her fingernails. "No, Blossom," she said, her voice hollow. "Mommy's taking a little break." She had to get out. The walls of her own kitchen were closing in. "I'm going to the garden," she mumbled, and fled, leaving Liam at the stove, flipping pancakes, a flimsy shield of normalcy against the coming storm. The morning air was cool and damp. The garden, her sanctuary, greeted her with an almost cruel beauty. The dew on the spiderwebs glittered like diamond nets. The delphiniums stood tall and proud, their spires a brilliant, defiant blue against the green. Yesterday, she would have seen life, potential, a symphony of her own creation. Today, she saw a battlefield. She knelt in the dirt, the familiar smell of soil filling her lungs. Her fingers sank into the cool earth. Here, the rules were simple. A plant either thrived or it withered. It fought for the sun, it drank the rain, or it died. There was no malice in it. It was an honest transaction with the earth. What was happening inside her felt like a perversion of that cycle. She saw a patch of clover, an insidious weed, winding its way through the roots of her prize-winning peonies. Without thinking, she began to pull at it, her movements frantic, vicious. She tore at the roots, ripping them from the soil, needing to eradicate this unwanted, invasive thing. This thing that grew where it wasn't wanted, that choked the life from the things she loved. Her breath came in ragged gasps, tears of rage and frustration blurring her vision. "They're just weeds, Alara." Liam stood on the edge of the patio, holding a mug of coffee. His face was a mask of concern. She stopped, her hands caked in mud, a tangle of uprooted clover in her fist. She looked at the mess she had made, the churned-up soil around the delicate peony stems. "I know," she whispered, her anger deflating, leaving only a vast, hollow emptiness. He came and sat on the grass beside her, careful not to get too close. "I shouldn't have ambushed you with all that talk of fighting." "It's okay," she said, not looking at him. "You need a plan. I get it." She let the weeds fall from her hand. I feel like I'm already haunted, Lee. I'm a ghost at my own funeral. And you're trying to teach me how to dance." He reached out then, and his hand covered hers. His was warm and solid, while hers felt cold, thin, like a leaf in autumn. "Then let me be haunted with you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Whatever you need to do. If you need to scream, scream. If you need to tear up every weed in this garden, I'll help you. But I can't just sit here and watch the days go by. I can't." She finally turned to look at him and saw the truth of it in his eyes. He was drowning, and the lists, the research, the talk of fighting, they were his life raft. To take that away from him would be to let him sink. "All right," she said, a decision solidifying within her. It was the promise she had made to herself last night, in the dark, watching his back tremble. She, the dying one, would comfort the living. Show me the lists. They would fight, not because she believed they could win, but because he needed a battle. And for the first time since the doctor's office, a sliver of clarity cut through the fog. Her life was no longer about the broad, sprawling future of the oak tree. It was now about these small, finite moments. It was about pancakes and holding a hand and allowing a desperate man his desperate hope. She looked down at her dirty hands, at the earth embedded in her skin. She was still a gardener, but the garden had changed. It was no longer the sprawling landscape of a lifetime. It was a single, precious window box, and she would tend to it, with all the love she had left, for as long as she could. Chapter 4. The Architecture of Hope. The lists were spread across the kitchen table like a desperate general's battle plans. The half-eaten pancakes sat cold and forgotten, a relic of a morning that had started with a child's simple request and had now descended into the grim calculus of survival. Liam's handwriting was a frantic scrawl, a testament to his sleepless, screen-lit night. It filled 3 pages of a legal pad, a chaotic jumble of names, acronyms, and dietary commandments. Asterisk Dr. Alistair Albright, Boston. Oncological specialist. Best in the Northeast. Asterisk. Clinical trial NCT 045888219. Immunotherapy combo. Asterisk the Gerson method. Research more. Asterisk. Asterisk no sugar. No red meat. No dairy. Asterisk. Asterisk turmeric. Goji berries. Essiac tea. Asterisk. Acupuncture. Dr. Chun, Westville. Asterisk meditation. Visualization. See the cells shrinking. Asterisk. Alara stared at the words, feeling profoundly disconnected from them, as if she were reading the itinerary for someone else's arduous journey. This wasn't her life. It was a script Liam had written overnight to stave off the terror of a blank page. It was his architecture of hope, a structure built of frantic keystrokes and tenuous links from medical forums, and she was merely the unstable ground upon which it was being built. He had built it for himself, to have something to do, something to hold, and she had promised to let him. Okay, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. She pointed a finger at the top of the first page. Let's start there. Dr. Albright. A spark of relief ignited in Liam's eyes. Action. A tangible step. He was on his feet in a second, retrieving his laptop from the counter. Right. I have the number for his office. I'll call now. He sat back down, the laptop a shield between them. Alara watched as he navigated a website, found the number, and dialed, his finger jabbing the keys with too much force. She could hear the tinny rings from his phone, each one a beat in a drum roll leading to what? She didn't know. She sipped her cold coffee. Yes, hello. Liam's voice was suddenly different. Deeper, more formal. The voice he used for important clients. My name is Liam Connolly. I'd like to make an appointment for my wife, Alara Connolly, to see Dr. Albright. A pause. Yes, a new patient. Alara watched his face. She saw the confident set of his jaw begin to soften, his brow furrowing slightly. I understand, he said, his tone tightening. Yes, we have a diagnosis from our local oncologist, Dr. Matthews. We're seeking a second opinion. Yes, of course, we can have her records sent over immediately. He picked up a pen and began to scribble on the legal pad, his movements sharp and angry. Fax number. Right. And what is the doctor's first availability? This was the crucial question. Alara found herself holding her breath, a traitorous flicker of something that felt dangerously like hope kindling in her own chest. She stamped it out. Hope was a luxury. Hope was the long view, the sprawling garden. She was tending a window box now. Liam's face fell. The hopeful warrior was gone, replaced by a defeated man arguing with a disembodied voice. 6 weeks? No, you don't understand. It's urgent. Is there anything sooner? A cancellation list. He listened, his knuckles white where he gripped the pen. The silence stretched. Alara could imagine the woman on the other end, her voice a polished, impenetrable barrier of professional calm, reciting policies she had repeated 1,000 times. They were not a unique tragedy to her. They were a name on a list, a file to be transferred, a time slot to be filled weeks from now. I see, Liam said finally, his voice flat. All the fight had gone out of it. Yes, thank you. He hung up without saying goodbye, staring at the phone in his hand as if it had personally betrayed him. 6 weeks, he said to the table. Best case. If we get the records to them by tomorrow and there are no cancellations. 6 weeks, just for a conversation. He looked up at her, his face a mask of helpless fury. What are we supposed to do for 6 weeks, Alara? Just wait. The question hung in the air, thick and unanswerable. Before Alara could formulate a reply, her own phone, lying on the counter, began to buzz. The screen lit up with a photo of Sarah, her business partner at the flower shop, the two of them laughing, covered in dirt after a particularly ambitious planting day. The image was from another lifetime. From last spring. She let it ring, The cheerful electronic melody, a jarring intrusion. "Aren't you going to get that?" Liam asked, his voice raw. She knew she had to. The real world, with its schedules and obligations, would not pause for them. She picked it up, took a breath, and tried to sound like the Alara from the photograph. "Hey, Sarah." "Alara. Thank God. I was getting worried. You didn't answer my text. Is everything okay? You never miss a Tuesday." Sarah's voice was a warm, familiar rush of concern. "Yeah, sorry. I'm just a little under the weather. Woke up with a bug, I think." The lie felt clumsy and heavy in her mouth. It was the first one. She felt a pang of guilt, a severing of a small, invisible thread that connected her to her friend. "Oh no. Is it that stomach thing that's been going around? Poor thing. Well, listen, don't you worry about a thing here, but I do need to ask about the Henderson wedding order. Did you finalize the delphinium count with the supplier? Their invoice is due today, and I don't want to get it wrong." The Henderson wedding. A celebration of a future. Bouquets and boutonnieres, centerpieces and garlands. A language of hope written in petals and stems. The details of it, once so vivid in her mind, now felt like ancient history. "The order form is on my desk," Alara said, her mind struggling to catch up. "In the blue folder. The final count should be on the top sheet. 150 stems. Perfect, you're a lifesaver. Okay, you rest up. Drink lots of fluids. Let me know if you'll be in tomorrow, otherwise I'll have to call in a temp." "I'll let you know," Alara said, the non-committal phrase tasting like more deceit. "Thanks, Sarah." She ended the call and placed the phone face down on the counter, as if to silence the life it contained. She turned back to Liam. His anger had subsided, replaced by a weary slump in his shoulders. He was looking at his list again, his eyes scanning for a different front on which to wage his war. "The bureaucracy," he muttered. "The waiting. It's a part of the disease, isn't it? It just lets it grow." He was right. The treason of her body was one thing, a silent, cellular coup. But this was another kind of betrayal, the cold, slow-moving machinery of the world that was supposed to help. "We'll get the records sent over," Alara said, her tone gentle. She was comforting him now. The absurdity of it was not lost on her. The dying consoling the living on the logistics of her own death. "We'll call every day to check for cancellations. What's next on the list?" He looked down, his finger tracing the frantic lines. He skipped over the clinical trials and the esoteric teas and landed on something immediate. Something he could control. "The diet," he said, seizing on it. "No sugar. No processed foods. It says here, an alkaline environment can slow growth. We can start that right now. Today." He stood up, renewed. He had a mission. He grabbed the car keys from the hook by the door. "I'll go to the store. I'll get kale, lemons, quinoa, whatever we need. I'll clear out the pantry." He was a man with a purpose again. "Okay," Alara said. He paused at the door, turning back to her. The frantic energy in his eyes was banked, replaced by a deep, aching tenderness that was almost harder to bear. "I'm sorry I blew up. It's just 6 weeks." "I know," she said. "Go. It's okay." He left, and the front door clicked shut behind him, plunging the house into a profound silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Alara stood alone in her kitchen, surrounded by the architecture of a hope she could not feel. The cold pancakes. The terrifying lists. She walked into the small sunroom off the kitchen that served as her office. Her desk was a comfortable chaos of seed catalogs, invoices, and sketches. Sitting right on top was the blue folder for the Henderson wedding. She opened it. Inside was her neat, looping handwriting, detailing floral arrangements for a happy day in June. White peonies for romance, ivy for fidelity, and 150 stems of brilliant blue delphinium for joy. It was all written in permanent ink, a language of futures she no longer spoke. The world was still planning weddings. The sun was still rising. And she was a ghost in her own home, her hands already covered in the soil of a garden she would never see bloom. Chapter 5. The Ritual of Cleansing. The silence Liam left behind was a physical presence in the house. It settled in the corners and pooled on the polished floorboards. For a long moment, Alara did not move from her sunroom. The blue folder on her desk was a portal to a world that was no longer accessible, a world of forward tense verbs and assumed futures. She reached out and traced the words Henderson Wedding with her fingertip. The ink was a deep, confident blue, the color of the sky on a perfect June afternoon, the color of delphiniums. She remembered ordering them, speaking with the wholesaler in Holland, her voice full of professional cheer, negotiating the price per stem. That was last week, 1,000 years ago. Now, the idea of 150 stems of joy felt like a cruel cosmic joke. She closed the folder gently, as if putting a treasured memento back into a box, and returned to the kitchen. The lists were still there, Liam's battle plans. She picked up the legal pad, her eyes skipping over the specialist's name and the clinical trial numbers. She landed on the dietary commandments, stark and absolute in their black and white certainty. Asterisk no sugar. No red meat. No dairy. Asterisk it wasn't a diet, it was an excommunication. A casting out of everything that had given them comfort and pleasure. She thought of Saturday morning bacon, of ice cream shared on the porch on a hot summer night, of the rich, dark chocolate Liam would bring her as a peace offering after an argument. All of it, now reclassified as poison. The sound of his car in the driveway broke her reverie. She braced herself. The front door opened and he entered, not with the weary slump of defeat, but with the brisk, determined energy of a man on a mission. His arms were laden with paper grocery bags, their tops overflowing with the alien greenery of their new life. Dark, curly kale, a clutch of celery like a green scepter, lemons glowing with acidic promise. Okay, he said, setting the bags on the counter with a purposeful thud. Phase 1. He didn't look at her. His focus was entirely on the task at hand. He began to unload the groceries, arranging them on the counter like a surgeon laying out his instruments. Organic quinoa, brown rice, a block of tofu, almond milk, bags of frozen berries, a head of cabbage that looked dense and joyless. There was no color of comfort, none of the vibrant packaging of their old life. It was the food of ascetics and saints. This is good, he said, more to himself than to her. This is proactive. We can control this. Then, he turned to the pantry. He opened the double doors, revealing the neatly organized shelves that held the story of their life together. The pasta from their trip to Italy, the obscure hot sauce he'd ordered online, the tin of shortbread from his mother, the half-eaten bag of her favorite salted caramel pretzels. It was a small, domestic archive of their shared tastes and travels. He pulled the large kitchen trash can into the center of the room. The metallic scrape against the floor tiles sounded like a declaration of war. What are you doing? Alara asked, though she already knew. We have to be ruthless, he said, his back to her as he pulled a box of sugary cereal from the top shelf. He looked at it for a second, then tossed it into the bin. It landed with a hollow, cardboard sigh. It's all poison, Alara. It feeds it. The articles are very clear. He worked with a grim efficiency, a man possessed. A bag of white flour followed the sea. Real. Then a container of brown sugar, which split open on impact, dusting the discarded cereal box like a sweet, sad snowfall. He was a whirlwind of repudiation, grabbing and discarding, his movements jerky and absolute. Jars of jam, a bottle of maple syrup, the box of instant hot cocoa they drank on winter nights. Thud, clatter, thud. Alara sat at the kitchen table, a spectator at the dismantling of her own life. He wasn't just throwing away food. He was throwing away memories. The marinara sauce they'd used for their first home-cooked meal in this house. The box of fancy crackers they'd bought for a party that was canceled. Each item was a small, silent testament to a life of casual, unthinking pleasure, a life where the future was a given, not a desperate negotiation. The pantry was a mausoleum of their former appetites, and he was the frantic, grieving groundskeeper, trying to tidy away the dead. She knew he was doing it out of love, out of a terror so profound he could only express it through this violent, cleansing act. He was trying to empty their home of the disease, as if it could be starved out by banishing a bag of potato chips. The logic was flawed, desperate, and heartbreakingly human. She let him continue, her silence a form of consent. He was almost done. The shelves were nearly bare, stripped down to a few cans of chickpeas and a lonely-looking jar of olives. Then his hand landed on a small, glass jar on the bottom shelf. It was a jar of wildflower honey from a farm stand they'd stopped at on a drive through the countryside last fall. It was thick and amber, with a piece of the comb still floating inside. She loved a spoonful of it in her tea. "Liam, wait," she said, her voice quiet but firm. He stopped, his hand still on the jar. He turned to look at her, his face flushed with the effort of his purge. "What?" "It's pure sugar, Alara. It has to go." "No," she said. "Leave that one." A look of complete bewilderment crossed his face. "Why?" "It's the worst of the lot." "You heard me. No sugar. It's just honey," she said, and she could hear the foolishness of her own words. It was just honey. In the face of cellular mutation and oncological charts, it was nothing. But it was also everything. It was a small, sweet thing in a world that had suddenly turned bitter and clinical. It was hers. "We can't make exceptions," he said, his voice taking on a pleading edge. "The whole point is to be absolute. To give it nothing to feed on. Don't you see? I'm trying to save you." There it was. The sentence that hung between them. The reason for this madness. "I'm trying to save you." And how could she argue with that? How could she tell him that his frantic attempt at salvation felt like an erasure? That in his noble quest to keep her alive, he was stripping away all the small things that made her feel alive in the first place? "It's one jar of honey, Liam," she said, standing up and walking over to him. She gently took the jar from his hand. It was cool and heavy. "It's from that day we drove out to the lake. You bought me an apple cider donut. We sat on that bench and watched the leaves fall." He stared at her, the frantic energy finally draining from his eyes, replaced by a raw, naked pain. He remembered the day. She could see it in the softening of his jaw. It was a good day. A normal day. A day from before. "Please," she whispered. "Let me keep the honey." He looked from the jar in her hands to the nearly empty shelves, to the trash can overflowing with the vibrant ghosts of their past. For the first time since the diagnosis, a crack appeared in his architectural plans. He saw not a soldier fighting a war, but a husband hurting his wife. He nodded, a single, sharp dip of his chin. He couldn't speak. He turned away and methodically began to wipe down the now bare shelves with a damp cloth, his movements slow and defeated. Alara placed the jar of honey on the counter, a solitary, golden monument to a tiny victory she had not wanted to fight. Later, they ate their first meal in this new world. Liam had cooked, following a recipe he'd found online. Quinoa with steamed kale and lemon juice. He served it in 2 white bowls. They sat opposite each other at the kitchen table, the silence stretching between them, thick and awkward. She picked up her fork and took a bite. The quinoa was gritty, the kale was bitter, and the lemon was a sharp, acidic sting. It was the taste of survival. The taste of a life she wasn't sure she wanted. She looked at Liam, who was mechanically chewing his own food, his eyes fixed on his bowl. Hope, it turned out, tasted of ashes. And as she forced down another spoonful, Alara realized that while Liam had spent the day building his fortress against death, she had spent it quietly mourning a life that was already gone. Chapter 6. A Tyranny of Care. The night did not bring peace, it only amplified the silence. They went to bed at their usual time, a pantomime of normalcy that felt more exhausting than any argument. But the space between them in the wide expanse of their mattress was a cold, unbridgeable chasm. Alara lay on her side, facing the window, her back a rigid wall against him. She could feel his stillness, the careful, shallow breaths he took so as not to disturb her. It was a courtesy that felt like another form of control, another edit to the script of their life. Sleep, when it finally came, was thin and troubled, a gray veil punctured by dreams of empty pantries and gardens where only bitter herbs would grow. She woke to a sound, a high-pitched, mechanical scream that seemed to be drilling its way into the foundation of the house. It was a violent, insistent noise, utterly alien to the gentle morning sounds she was used to. The murmur of the coffee maker, the soft clink of a spoon against a ceramic mug. For a confused second, she thought something was terribly wrong, that an alarm had been triggered. Then, memory returned, cold and unwelcome. It was the juicer. She found Liam in the kitchen, a man officiating a strange, new morning ritual. He stood before a gleaming chrome machine, the altar of their new faith. On the counter beside him were the sacrificial offerings, a pile of dark kale, a bag of carrots scrubbed raw, a green apple sliced with brutal precision, a knob of ginger. He fed the items into the machine's gullet, one by one, tamping them down with a black plastic plunger. The juicer shrieked and shuddered, spitting a thin stream of murky, green liquid into a glass pitcher and ejecting a damp pulp of fibrous remains into a separate container. The air smelled of raw earth and crushed chlorophyll. The ghost of coffee haunted the room, a phantom aroma from 1,000 mornings past. The coffee maker sat dark and unplugged on the counter, a relic from a forgotten civilization. "Morning," he said, his voice strained over the machine's roar. He didn't look at her. His focus was absolute. This was his work. This was his war room. When the last piece of apple had been devoured by the machine, he switched it off. The sudden silence was deafening, leaving a ringing in Alara's ears. He poured the sludgy green liquid into 2 tall glasses. He pushed one across the counter to her. "Drink up," he said, attempting a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "First strike in the morning. Hits the cells before anything else can." She looked at the glass. It was the color of pond scum. Small bubbles clung to the surface. She could see the tiny, suspended flecks of vegetable matter. She thought of the rich, dark roast she used to drink, the way she'd hold the warm mug in her hands on a cool morning, inhaling the steam, the small, perfect comfort that eased her into the day. This was not comfort. This was medicine. A punishment. She picked up the glass. It was cold. She took a small, hesitant sip. The taste was an assault. It was bitter from the kale, aggressively earthy from the carrots, with a sharp, fiery kick of ginger that burned the back of her throat. It was the taste of righteous suffering. She put the glass down, a wave of nausea rising in her. "It's strong," she managed. "It's supposed to be," Liam said, already halfway through his own glass, drinking it down like a shot. "It's potent, full of phytochemicals, alkalizing." He was speaking a new language, the jargon of the desperately hopeful. He'd spent the night online, she knew, arming himself with articles and forum posts, building his arsenal of terminology. He wasn't just her husband anymore. He was her warden, her nutritionist, her general. And her body was his battlefield. He rinsed his glass and placed it in the dishwasher. "I have to head into the office for a few hours," he said, his back still to her. "There's quinoa salad in the fridge for your lunch. And I portioned out some almonds for a snack. 15 exactly. Don't have more." A cold fury, sharp and sudden, pricked at her. 15 almonds. Her life was now being measured out in counted nuts. Before she could form a reply, the landline on the kitchen wall rang. Its cheerful, electronic chirp, another sound from the old world. They both stared at it, startled. No one ever called the landline anymore, except for their parents or the occasional political survey. Liam answered it, his voice reverting to its normal, easy cadence. "Hello. Oh, hi, Carol. Yes, she's right here. One moment." He held the receiver out to Alara. "It's Carol Henderson," he whispered, his eyes wide with a flicker of panic. as if an enemy agent had breached their fortress. Alara's heart gave a lurch. Mrs. Henderson. The Henderson wedding. The blue folder. She took the phone, her hand trembling slightly. Carol? Hi, it's Alara. Alara, dear, thank goodness I caught you. Carol's voice was a warm, breathless rush. I am so sorry to call the house, but you weren't answering your cell, and I just had a thought. A brilliant one, if I do say so myself. We're finalizing the linens with the rental company, and I was looking at the swatches, and it hit me. What if, instead of white delphiniums on the tables, we did a very pale, almost silvery blue hydrangea? It would be so much softer, don't you think? More romantic. Does that throw your whole plan into chaos? Alara closed her eyes. Linens. Swatches. The profound, beautiful, breathtaking triviality of it all. The words felt like a lifeline thrown from a distant, sunlit shore. For a moment, she was back in her sunroom, surrounded by color charts and sketches, the scent of fresh-cut stems in the air. She was a professional, a creator of beautiful things. She was herself. No, she said, her voice stronger than she expected. No, Carol, that doesn't throw anything into chaos. It's a lovely idea. Hydrangeas would be gorgeous. Let me just pull up your file. She glanced at Liam. He was standing by the counter, his arms crossed, his face a mask of anxious disapproval. He shook his head, a tiny, sharp motion. Don't do this, his eyes said. Asterisk, this is stress. This is what we're eliminating. Asterisk. She turned her back on him, cradling the phone between her ear and shoulder as she walked towards her sunroom. The silvery blue is a wonderful choice, she continued, her voice gaining confidence with every word. It would complement the bridesmaids' dresses perfectly. We can get some really beautiful, full-headed ones this time of year. She was halfway to the sunroom door when Liam spoke, his voice low and tight. Alara, what are you doing? She stopped, but kept her back to him, pressing the phone tighter to her ear. I'm talking to a client, Liam. You shouldn't be, he said, the words clipped. You need to rest. You need to focus on the protocol. Carol's voice was still chirping in her ear, oblivious. And perhaps a few sprigs of eucalyptus mixed in? Or would that be too much? Carol, can you hold on for just one moment? Alara said into the receiver. She pressed the hold button, the small beep severing her connection to that other world. She turned to face her husband. The protocol? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Is that what we're calling it now? This joyless, green, 15 hell is the protocol? It's a plan, he insisted, his jaw tight. It's the best plan. I'm trying to keep you safe. A wedding is the last thing you should be thinking about. The stress, the deadlines. The wedding is my job, Liam. It's my life. Or it was, until you threw it in the trash yesterday along with the maple syrup. That's not fair. His voice rose, edged with desperation. This is about your health. About keeping you alive. Does a bride's choice of flower really matter right now? The question hung in the air, raw and devastating. And in the cold, brutal logic of their new reality, he was right. It didn't matter. In the face of a terrifyingly uncertain future, the color of a hydrangea was meaningless. But his rightness was a tyranny. His care was a cage. Yes, she said, and the word was a revelation to them both. Yes, it does. It matters to Carol Henderson. And it matters to me. It matters that I can talk to someone about something other than cellular health and alkalizing diets. It matters that I can still create something beautiful. It matters that I am still the person I was last week. Her voice broke on the last few words. The person you married. A florist. Not just a patient. The fight went out of him. The rigid posture of the general crumbled, and he was just her husband again, his face etched with a pain that mirrored her own. He looked at the half-finished glass of green juice on the counter, at the bare pantry shelves behind her, at the phone she clutched in her hand like a weapon. He saw, finally, the destruction left in the wake of his desperate, loving campaign. He started, his voice thick. I don't want to lose you. I can't. "You're not going to lose me," she whispered, though it was a promise neither of them knew if she could keep. "But you will, Liam, if you try to erase me in the name of saving me. Please, I have to do this. I need to." She watched him, waiting. For the first time since the diagnosis, she was not a passive participant in his strategy. She was drawing a line, not in the sand, but in the heart of their home. He looked down at his hands, then back up at her. He gave a slow, defeated nod. It was a surrender, and it was, perhaps, the first truly healing thing that had happened between them. She turned and walked into her sunroom, closing the glass-paned door behind her. She picked up the blue folder from her desk, the one she had closed so tenderly yesterday, and opened it. She clicked the hold button off on the phone. "Carol? I'm back," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Now, about those hydrangeas. I think you're right. They'll be perfect." On the kitchen counter, untouched, the jar of wildflower honey caught the morning light, its golden contents a quiet testament to a small, sweet, and necessary rebellion. Chapter 7. The Sovereign Nation of a Sunroom. The sunroom was not just a room, it was a sovereign nation. The moment Alara closed the glass-paned door, she felt the shift in atmosphere, a change in diplomatic relations with the rest of the house. Here, the sterile, anxious air of the kitchen could not penetrate. The light was different, filtered through the broad leaves of a fiddle-leaf fig and refracted by the dozens of small glass vases on her shelves, casting tiny rainbows on the floorboards. The air smelled of paper and pollen and the faint, sweet decay of a fallen petal. This was her territory. On the phone with Carol Henderson, she was not a patient, not a body under siege. She was an expert. Her voice, which had felt thin and reedy in the kitchen, found its familiar timbre. She moved around the room with purpose, her hand gliding over the spines of catalogs, pulling a book of fabric swatches from a shelf. "Silvery blue hydrangeas, yes," she murmured, her mind painting the picture. "But we'll need to ground them, Carol. Otherwise, they might float away, visually speaking. What if we wove in some thistle? A dusty, gray-blue globe thistle. It adds texture, a touch of wildness. It says romance, but it also says strength." She could hear Carol's delighted gasp on the other end of the line. This was the language she spoke. Not phytochemicals and alkalinity, but texture and strength. Not protocols, but palettes. For 15 minutes, she was entirely herself, a cartographer of beauty, mapping out a single perfect day for someone else. The blue folder lay open on her desk, no longer a symbol of a life interrupted, but a tool of her trade, humming with purpose. When she finally hung up, a profound sense of peace settled over her. It was the satisfying quiet that follows a period of intense, fulfilling work. She stood for a moment, her hand resting on the cool surface of her oak desk, and simply breathed. She could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, a reminder of the other world, Liam's world, just a few feet away. The treaty she had brokered this morning felt fragile. Steeling herself, she opened the door and stepped back across the border. The kitchen was silent and scrubbed clean. The juicer had been disassembled, its chrome components washed and drying in the rack, gleaming like surgical tools. Liam was standing at the sink, his back to her, methodically wiping down the already immaculate stainless steel basin. It was a gesture of contained fury, of displaced anxiety. He didn't turn around when he heard her enter. The two glasses, hers and his, were in the dishwasher. Hers was still 3/4 full of the green sludge when she had abandoned it. He had disposed of the evidence. It was an act that could be interpreted as kindness, sparing her the rest of the ordeal, or as a quiet judgment, a cleaning up of her failure. She walked to the counter and stood there, waiting. The silence stretched, thin and taut. Finally, he turned off the water, dried his hands with a paper towel, and faced her. His eyes were shadowed, guarded. "Did you fix the flower problem?" he asked. The words were stiff, foreign on his tongue. He was trying to extend an olive branch, but it felt more like a stick he was using to poke at a dangerous animal. "There was no problem," she said, her voice gentle. "Just an idea. A better one. We fixed it." He nodded, looking past her towards the unplugged coffee maker. "Good," he said. It was a single, flat note in the cavernous silence. He gestured to the refrigerator. "I have to get back to the office. Your lunch is in there. Quinoa salad." He said the words like a doctor prescribing a medication. "Remember, just that. Nothing else until the almonds at 3. He grabbed his laptop bag from a chair. He was leaving. He was running away from the complexity of the room, from the woman who refused to fit neatly into his columns of data and dietary restrictions. He needed to return to a world of spreadsheets and certainties, where problems had clear, logical solutions. He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. "I'm not the enemy, Alara," he said, his voice quiet and raw. "I know," she whispered to the empty space after he'd gone. "The enemy is the enemy. You're just collateral damage. So am I." The front door clicked shut. She was alone. The house exhaled. She went to the refrigerator and took out the container. Quinoa salad. It was exactly as she'd imagined. A colorless mound of grains dotted with finely chopped parsley, celery, and cucumber. It was clean. It was pure. It looked like penance. She picked up a fork and took a bite. It tasted of nothing. It was the culinary equivalent of a hospital room, sterile, functional, and utterly devoid of joy. Her eyes fell on the jar of wildflower honey sitting on the counter, where it had stood in silent protest all morning. The morning light struck the glass, making the amber liquid glow as if lit from within. It was a small sun in her gray kitchen. A rebellion, she had thought. But it wasn't about rebellion. It was about balance. It was about living, not just surviving. She took the jar and a small lemon from the fruit bowl, a piece of contraband he must have missed in his purge. In a small bowl, she squeezed the lemon juice, added a spoonful of olive oil from the back of the cupboard, and then, with deliberate, almost ceremonial slowness, she dipped a clean spoon into the honey. She watched the thick, golden ribbon curl and fall into the bowl. She whisked the simple dressing together and poured it over the quinoa salad, tossing it until every grain glistened. She took another bite. The change was transformative. The bright acid of the lemon, the richness of the oil, the faint, floral sweetness of the honey. They didn't mask the salad, they awakened it. They gave it a soul. It was still healthy. It was still on the right side of his war. But now it was hers. Eating her lunch, she felt a clarity she hadn't felt in days. The phone call with Carol hadn't just been a lifeline. It had been a reminder. Her work wasn't just a job. It was a physical, tactile thing. She couldn't design a centerpiece by looking at a catalog. She needed to feel the velvet of a petal, to see the way the light caught the waxy sheen of a leaf, to smell the peppery scent of a fresh-cut freesia. She needed her studio. The thought, once it formed, was an undeniable truth. She couldn't do this from her sunroom, a beautiful but isolated embassy. She had to go to her own country. She washed her bowl, her movements now quick and decisive. She walked into the bedroom and changed out of her pajamas into jeans and a soft sweater. She looked at her reflection for the first time that day. She saw the fear in her own eyes, but beneath it, a flicker of something else. Resolve. She picked up her purse and her car keys. As she walked back through the kitchen, she saw the note he'd left on the counter, on a stark white piece of paper. 3:00 p.m., 15 almonds, raw, unsalted. Beside it, he'd placed a small, clear baggie with the almonds counted out inside. Her life, portioned and packaged. She looked at the bag, then picked it up and slipped it into her purse. A concession. A bridge. She wouldn't burn everything down. She was opening the door to the garage when her phone buzzed. It was a text from Liam. "Did you eat the salad?" She stood for a long moment, her keys cold in her hand. She could lie. She could tell him what he wanted to hear. Or she could tell him the truth, a truth he wasn't ready for. She chose a third option, one that was both true and evasive. "It was delicious," she typed. Asterisk, I have to go to the studio for a few hours. Need to prep for the Henderson order. Asterisk. She hit send before she could lose her nerve. She didn't wait for a reply. She opened the garage door, the noise echoing in the silent house. The car started with a low, reassuring rumble. As she backed out of the driveway, her phone buzzed again, frantically, twice, 3 times. She didn't look at it. She turned onto their quiet street, heading away from the tyranny of care and towards the messy, unpredictable, and beautiful chaos of her own life. Chapter 8. The Cartography of Us. The drive to the studio was a quiet act of liberation. Each turn of the wheel was a sentence in a declaration she hadn't yet spoken aloud. The world outside the car window, once a landscape of potential threats, pollen, pollution, triggers, was simply the world again. A neighborhood of houses, a blur of green trees, a sky streaked with the pale gold of late afternoon. By the time she pulled into the small gravel lot behind the converted warehouse, the frantic buzzing of her phone in her purse had faded into a dull, distant vibration. Unlocking the studio door was like taking her first full breath of the day. The air inside was cool and damp, a stark contrast to the climate-controlled sterility of her house. It smelled of earth and water, of the sharp, green scent of snapped stems, and the fainter, sweeter perfume of lilies beginning to open. This was not a sunroom embassy. This was the homeland. Her studio was a cathedral of controlled wilderness. Buckets of flowers lined the concrete floor, a riot of color and texture. The deep, velvety purple of lisianthus, the spiky blue heads of the globe thistle she described to Carol, the creamy white of garden roses, their petals thick and plush. Workbenches were cluttered with spools of ribbon, sharp-nosed clippers, and vases of all shapes and sizes. A fine dusting of pollen covered nearly every surface. It was messy. It was alive. It was hers. She didn't begin the Henderson order immediately. First, she needed to reclaim herself. She walked to a bucket of deep burgundy dahlias, their heads as large as dinner plates. She ran a thumb over a petal, feeling its waxy, resilient texture. She picked up her clippers, the cold steel familiar and comforting in her palm. The clean, satisfying snip as she cut a stem was a sound of purpose. For the next hour, she worked. Her hands, which had trembled holding the green juice that morning, were now steady and sure. They moved with an instinct that bypassed thought, a language her body spoke fluently. She stripped lower leaves, measured stems against a tall ceramic vase, and began to build. It wasn't about following a recipe, it was a conversation. A tall, arching branch of eucalyptus provided the structure. The heavy-headed dahlias anchored the base. She wove in the thistle for texture, just as she'd planned, then added delicate sprays of waxflower, tiny stars scattered through the arrangement. She was not a patient here. She was a creator. She was not a set of symptoms and dietary restrictions. She was an artist, translating emotion into a physical form. The ache in her back from leaning over the bench was a good ache. The smudge of green on her cheek was a mark of industry, not illness. A profound, quiet joy filled her, a feeling so potent it felt like the most powerful medicine she could ever take. This, she realized, was what Liam's carefully constructed regimen was missing. This was the phytochemical of joy, the alkaline of purpose. The sound of a car crunching on the gravel outside shattered the peace. She didn't need to look. She knew the sound of his engine, the particular way his car door shut with a solid, definitive thud. She kept her back to the door, her hands still busy with a strand of ivy. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. She braced herself. The door opened, and he was there. Liam stood on the threshold, a silhouette against the bright afternoon sun. He looked as though he had stepped across not just a doorway, but a dimensional rift, a man from a black and white world entering a land of overwhelming color. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fury. Alara. Her name was a gasp, an accusation. He took a step inside, his gaze sweeping over the studio, seeing not beauty, but chaos. Not life, but 1,000 different allergens. What are you doing? The pollen, the exertion, this is everything you're supposed to avoid. I'm working, Liam, she said, her voice quiet but firm. She finally turned to face him. She held a single white rose in her hand. This isn't work. This is a risk. I called you. I texted. I was terrified. I thought. I don't know what I thought. He ran a hand through his hair, his composure, always so immaculate, finally cracking. I am trying to keep you safe. I am trying to keep you alive. Why are you fighting me on this? Because you're not trying to keep me alive, she said, and the truth of it, spoken aloud, resonated in the quiet space between them. You're trying to keep a body alive. My body. And I am grateful for that. I truly am. But you're so focused on the vessel that you're letting the person inside of it starve to death. She took a step towards him, holding the rose like a fragile weapon. This morning, in the kitchen, I felt like I was disappearing. The juicer, the lists, the quinoa. It's all about subtraction. Taking things away. But a life isn't built by what you take away. It's built by what you add. She gestured around the room, at the buckets of flowers, the beautiful, fragrant, imperfect mess of it all. This is what I add. This isn't a risk, Liam. This is the reason to take the risk. This is the point of being alive, not just being not dead. He looked from her to the arrangement on the table, a wild, asymmetrical thing of beauty, of strength and fragility intertwined. He saw the spiky thistle nestled against the soft, yielding petals of a rose. For the first time, he seemed to be truly looking, not just scanning for threats. I'm scared, he whispered, the anger draining out of him, leaving only the raw fear that had been fueling it all along. I'm so scared of losing you, Alara. Every day? The protocols, the food, it's the only thing I can control. It's the only thing I know how to do. Her own anger softened, replaced by a wave of aching love for this man, this brilliant, terrified man who had tried to build a fortress of logic around the chaos of her illness. I know, she said gently. She walked back to her purse, which she dropped on a stool, and took out the small, clear baggie. She held out the 15 almonds. I brought these, she said. He stared at the bag, confused. You were supposed to eat them at 3. We're a team, Liam. I know that. But we've been fighting the wrong enemy. We've been fighting my life. The enemy is the illness, and we fight it together. But not by building a sterile prison. We fight it by building a life that is so rich and so beautiful that the illness has less room to occupy. She opened the bag and held it out to him. This is me meeting you. This is me saying I will take care of my body. I will be careful. But you have to meet me too. You have to let me feed my soul. He looked at her face, at the smudge of green on her cheek and the light of purpose in her eyes. He saw the woman he had fallen in love with, not the patient he was trying to manage. Slowly, as if in a trance, he reached into the bag and took out a single almond. He put it in his mouth. The small, dry sound of him chewing it was the loudest thing in the room. It was the sound of a concession. A treaty. He swallowed. Okay, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Okay, Alara. He stepped forward, finally crossing the threshold completely, and carefully, as if she were one of her own creations, he wrapped his arms around her. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of her, which was mixed with the green, earthy smell of her studio. He wasn't holding a patient. He was holding his wife. They stood there for a long time, surrounded by the beautiful chaos. The war was not over. The enemy was still a shadow within her. But the civil war, the one that had been waged across their kitchen counter, was. They had found a new border, not a line between his world and hers, but a shared territory where caution and joy could coexist. This was their new cartography, a map they would have to draw together, one day, one thistle, and one almond at a time. And so, we leave Alara and Liam in the quiet, fragrant sanctuary of her studio, standing in the shared territory they have just begun to map. Their story, like so many of our own, is not about finding an easy way around a storm, but about learning how to stand together in the heart of it, holding on to what truly matters. The journey that began with a devastating diagnosis, with a prognosis that felt like a final, slamming door, has transformed. It has become not a countdown to an ending, but a profound exploration of what it means to truly be alive for every single moment we are given. The war is not over, and the outcome remains uncertain. The enemy within Alera's body is a clinical fact, a formidable opponent. But the civil war between them, the war of fear against life, of control against freedom, of survival against joy, has reached a ceasefire. Liam's desperate architecture of hope, built from lists and restrictions, has been redesigned. It now has space for a sunroom, for the scent of roses, for the sweet, small rebellion of a single jar of honey. He has learned that you cannot save a body by starving its soul. And Alera, in fighting for her right to her own life, has discovered a strength she never knew she possessed, the strength to define her days not by their number, but by their beauty. Their story is a powerful reminder for all of us. How often do we, in the face of fear, try to build fortresses around ourselves and the ones we love? How often does our care, born from the purest intentions, become a kind of tyranny? We create rigid protocols and sterile environments, hoping to eliminate every risk, and in the process, we risk eliminating life itself. We focus so intently on the bitter kale that we forget the necessity of the honey. Alera and Liam's journey teaches us that the most courageous act in the face of despair is not to build higher walls, but to cultivate a more vibrant garden within them. It is to find the balance between caution and creation, between taking our medicine and feeding our souls. You might be asking, in a story with such a heavy prognosis, where is the miracle? Here at Prayer Miracles, we believe that miracles are not always the loud, world-altering events we expect. They are not always the sudden reversal of a doctor's report or the parting of a sea. More often, they are quiet, profound, and intensely personal. The miracle in this story is the miracle of transformation. It is the miracle of Liam's heart softening, moving from a general waging a war to a husband holding his wife. It is the miracle of Alera, in the shadow of her own mortality, finding the most potent reason to live, not in a far-off future, but in the texture of a dahlia petal right now. The true miracle is the peace that can be found in the midst of chaos, the love that can be redefined in the crucible of suffering, and the joy that can be deliberately chosen, even when sorrow is a constant companion. It is the grace that allows two terrified people to stop fighting each other and instead turn, hand in hand, to face the unknown together. Prayer, in its deepest form, is the path to these quiet miracles. It is the conversation we have with God that gives us the strength to face the diagnosis, the wisdom to comfort our loved ones, and the grace to find the sovereign nation of our own sunroom, no matter what storms may rage outside. Thank you so very much for joining us on this deeply personal journey with Alera and Liam. Thank you for walking through the sterile kitchen with them, for feeling the chill of fear, and for standing with them in the warmth and vibrant life of the flower studio. We know this story touches upon some of the most difficult questions and fears we all face, and we are grateful that you have shared this space and this time with us. Here at Prayer Miracles, we are dedicated to sharing stories that explore the incredible resilience of the human spirit when it is touched by faith. We believe that in every life, in every struggle, there is a story of a quiet miracle waiting to be told, a story of hope, of change, of love's enduring power. If this story of Alera and Liam has moved you, if it has made you think about the gardens in your own life, then we invite you to become a part of our community. Please, take a moment to click the subscribe button below and ring the notification bell. By subscribing, you ensure that you won't miss a single story of hope and transformation. You'll be joining a community of people who believe in looking for the light, even on the darkest days. Your support allows us to continue bringing these important narratives to the world. From all of us at Prayer Miracles, may you find the strength to tend to your own garden with courage and grace. May you have the wisdom to fight the right battles. And in all things, may you always remember to leave room for the honey. God bless.